All right, students, let's take a look at Chapter 6. Right now, I'm looking at the table of contents. Chapter 6 is on human research. It starts out by explaining how clinical trials work. Mostly, they focus on testing of new medications. They talk about placebos. Placebos is basically a sugar pill. So what that means is, say, for example, they're testing a new medication. They have two groups of people. One group gets the new medication and the other group gets a fake medication, a placebo. And then they say, okay, who does better? And they're hoping that people with the real medication are doing better than the ones with the sugar pill. There's a section on informed consent. So what they're talking about is if you're in a test and you're testing a new medication, that you're signing off on it, that you're giving your consent, that you understand the risks and you're saying, yes, I understand all the risks and I'm going to do it anyway because I want to help, something like that. Then they go on to applying major theories. We're going to be learning about different theories, utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and then they apply these theories to all these ethical situations. All right, let's get started. Page 239, Human Research. They open up the chapter by telling us some pretty horrible things. They talk to us about World War II, Nazi doctors who did horrifying experiments on prisoners of war, civilians, including children, murder, torture, other atrocities, and they said, oh, it's all in the name of science. At least one of you will be researching this and presenting it to the class. Another one we're going to be focusing on is the one the United States Public Health Service did. It lasted for 40 years. It started in 1932 and kept going until 72. It kept going until it was leaked and the news, the headlines got a hold of it, and then it got shut down. They wanted to study syphilis, what happens to a person's body when they live with syphilis for years and then die. So they weren't interested in helping anybody or curing anybody because they just wanted to see what happens and then take a look, do an autopsy to see how it affects the body. It involved 600 men. What they did was went into a community that was a black community, where people were poor and not educated, had limited reading skills. 400 of them had syphilis. Then there were secret experiments by the United States government to see how radiation affects people. There were thousands of people involved, including children. It was all secret. They had no idea they were being experimented on. They were subjected to high doses of radiation. Okay, and there's more. The chapter goes on. So at this point, as things got out in the news, and especially when there was a trial of the Nazi doctors, people got together and said, all right, we need codes, we need guidelines, we need ethical rules about experimenting on humans. And that's when we had things such as the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report. And at the end of this chapter, they have copies of those for you to look at. Okay, now, experimenting on humans, clinical trials. So, imagine there's a new medication coming out, or more recently, a vaccine. So they'll have two groups. One is the group that's going to take that new medication, and another one doesn't. And then they basically compare them. The control group, so again, it's the experimental group is the one that gets the medication. The control group is the one that doesn't. The control group, so they'll get a placebo, which is a sugar pill, and then they don't know they're taking the sugar pill. They have no idea. So with the groups, they don't know if they're getting the fake one or the real one. Why? Because if people knew they were getting the fake one, they might use like their mind or imagination to be like, oh, I'm just getting sicker. So they don't want people's minds or imaginations to influence how their health presents. There is another type of clinical trial where instead of getting a sugar pill, they get the old medication. Like supposing there's a regular medication they've been using for years and now they've come up with a new one, then one group gets the new one and the other group gets the old one, and then they compare it. Here in your textbook on page 241, they talk about the Tuskegee tragedy, so you can read through that. Now here's some vocabulary that you need to know. Blinding. What that means is the people don't know if they're getting the sugar pill or the regular medicine or the new medicine. Because again, as I mentioned, if they know, it might affect how they act or what's going on. But there's another thing called double blinding, where even the researchers don't know. So yes, somebody knows somewhere, somebody's keeping track of it, but the person who's passing out the medication every day or every week or however often, they don't know if they're passing out the real one or the sugar one. Why? Because they might subconsciously like act differently or treat people differently. So, like that. So they try to keep it secret so somebody in the background knows who's getting what, but the people interacting with them every day don't. Double blinded is subjects and researchers are unaware. Single blinded is just the subjects, the people taking the medication are unaware. Randomization, that's when they put people randomly into the groups. So you got the people together and then you got to decide, okay, who's going in the experimental group, who's going to get the medication, and who's going to go into the control group that gets the sugar pill. They have to do it randomly because you don't want a situation where they're like, oh, let's put the extra healthy people in the experimental group. No, then it wouldn't come out right. You have to put them randomly in. There's different stages of trial tests. Phase 1, they only give it to a few people. They want to make sure it's safe and there's no adverse reactions. Then when they see, okay, this is pretty good, nobody's dying, anything like that. All right, now let's do phase 2. Phase 2 is when they give it to a larger group and they start to get more information on the effectiveness. Then phase 3 is where you really spread it out with more people. Then sometimes there's a phase 4. That's after. So now it's already been approved. Now it's being prescribed to people, but they continue to research it to see long-term effects, things like that. That would be a phase 4 trial. Beneficence, science, and placebos. Beneficence, okay, so that's one of the vocabulary words. That's about helping people, being supporting their wellness. Placebos is the sugar pills. So this, if you're going to have beneficence, the study has to be designed to minimize the risks. There has to be an acceptable balance of risk and benefits. People have to be, when they say subjects, they mean the people in the experiment. They have to be selected fairly. You can't exploit them or unjustly exclude them. Let's talk about that, unjustly excluding them. There's a section in this chapter on excluding women from experiments. Many times when they're testing medication, they only had men in it. But then later, that medication was prescribed to women. But the thing is, the physiology is different. The way medication affects women is different. And so if you don't test it on women, then you don't know how safe it is. You don't know how big or small to make the dosage. So that's unjustly excluding them. Then when they talk about exploiting would be when someone goes into a prison and says, oh, look at all these people here. Let's just do experiments on them. And the people are basically trapped in the jail, so they get taken advantage of and exploited. Okay, so you don't want either of those things to happen. There also has to be privacy protected, things like that. And also they need an institutional review board, IRB. So the before you do the experiment, this review board takes a look at it and makes sure you're doing everything in a way that's ethical. So there's autonomy, respect for people, beneficence, doing good and avoiding harm, justice, treating people equally with respect. Those are things you want to see when you're doing human research. Okay, let me continue. They give a lot of examples here that you can read through. There is a section on informed consent. Informed consent. Consent means you agree to it. Informed means you've got the necessary information. They've given you the information, you understand the information, and then based on that, you say yes. And what happened was in the past, people were forced to do it, like with the World War II Nazi doctors. These people didn't consent to these horrible experiments. Then here's the section on women in clinical trials that I just mentioned. A lot of times, only men were tested, and then you don't actually know how the drug affects women because the physiology is different. All right, let me go back and read the headline of that section. Hang on. Sorry, I'm going backwards. Okay, so we're still on the topic of informed consent. So you're telling that, so any alternative procedures or courses of treatment that could be advantageous to, you're explaining all of them. This is all aspects of informed consent. The extent to which confidentiality of records, I mean, after they do the research, is their name going to be out there? No. So you have to explain how confidential it's going to be. Then also, are they going to offer medical services? What if after this experiment, it affects the person in a bad way, and then they need medical support afterwards? Who's paying for that? And what about therapy? What if it was a psychology experiment or an experiment that has to do with psychological medication, and then afterwards you need therapy? Okay, who's paying for that? So all this has to be explained. And then also, people are supposed to be free to withdraw at any time if they realize that this is a problem. Research on the vulnerable. I did mention that. That would be, for example, on prisoners, but also poor populations. Sometimes these pharmaceutical industries, they'll go into countries that have a high poverty rate and just take advantage of whole communities. Children, folks with mentally disabled. All right. So all that they're saying is unethical when you take advantage of people like that. Now, the question of research on children is tricky. So how can a child give informed consent when they're just children? So that means you have to trust that the parents will give informed consent. But the thing is, one might say, well, no, let's just not even give experiments on children. But if it's a medication for kids, kids have to be experimented on first to make sure the medication works. So it's tricky. And then there's a highlighted section here. No more than minimal risk to children. The benefits justify the risks. Okay, so you can go through this here. All right. Here they talk about exploitation of people in developing countries. I just mentioned that, where a pharmaceutical company will go into a country where the people are poor and then just take advantage of them and offer them something small, like, oh, if you participate in this, we'll give you a little money, but then expose them to something really risky, and that's taking advantage. Every chapter we go through is going to have a section called Applying Major Theories. So they'll look at it from the point of view, for example, of utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for more people. And they'll also look at Kantian ethics, which we're going to go over. So from the utilitarian view, if there's the greatest good, if in the end it's going to help more people than it hurts, they'll be like, yes, do it. Kantian ethics, there's a strict rule with Kantian ethics that you can't just use people or take advantage of them, and there has to be informed consent. All right, we'll go over that more. And now I'll stop.